You ever have a moment so sharp it cuts straight through 30 years of memory? A single sentence that carves itself into your bones so deep you can still feel the echo of it decades later? For me, that moment was in 1986. It was a Wednesday night, the kind of night that smelled like burnt coffee and wet pavement. I had just come home from another 12-hour shift at the Public Works office. My hands were black with graphite and dirt. My back ached from leaning over a drafting table all day. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table, her elbows pressed into a stack of unpaid bills, her eyes fixed somewhere past the wallpaper. The TV hummed low in the background, some talk show host laughing at his own jokes. Our son, Ethan, was asleep upstairs. He was 6 back then, still young enough to believe I could fix anything. I remember I set my lunchbox on the counter and said, "They finally approved the new bridge plan near Riverside. Might mean a raise next year." She didn't look up, not at first. Then she said it, quiet, flat, like she'd rehearsed it all day. I should have married someone who dreamed bigger. Just like that. No yelling, no tears, no storm, just a sentence. I stood there, not even sure I heard her right. "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed. "Mike, you're a good man. But this life, it's small. You wake up, you go to work, you come home tired, you never talk about wanting more. Don't you ever think about doing something big? Something that actually matters?" Her words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. I wanted to tell her that the world needs people who show up, that bridges don't build themselves, that safety, structure, and quiet reliability do matter. But the words never came out. Instead, I just nodded. Picked up my lunchbox again, set it in the sink. She stared at me like she was waiting for a fight, waiting for me to prove her wrong. But I didn't. I just stood there, tired and small in my own kitchen. The refrigerator buzzed. A clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere outside, a car rolled past and splashed through a puddle. That was the moment, the one I'd replay 1,000 times. I should have married someone who dreamed bigger. I didn't sleep that night. I laid there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing beside me. Not angry, just empty. Like someone had reached inside me and turned off a light I didn't even know was on. By morning, she was humming while she made breakfast like nothing happened. Ethan came running down the stairs with his backpack, shouting about a science project. I smiled, kissed him on the head, and left for work. Same as always. But something in me had changed. On the drive to the office, I watched the fog roll off the river and thought about that bridge, the one my team was assigned to repair. It wasn't glamorous work, no headlines, no applause, but people depended on it. They trusted that when they crossed it every day, it would hold. And maybe, I thought, that was my dream. Not something flashy, not something loud, just something that lasts. Still, her words wouldn't leave me. They followed me through the years like a shadow. Dream bigger, dream bigger. I started staying later at work, studying new materials, taking certification courses at night. I didn't tell her any of it, didn't tell anyone, I just worked. People think silence means weakness. It doesn't. Sometimes silence is where you build the kind of strength no one can see. I didn't know it then, but that night, those 10 words would define the rest of my life. 30 years later, the city built a bridge over that same river. The one I used to stare at through the morning fog. It was stronger than any structure I'd ever designed. And they named it after me. The Michael Grady Bridge. I never asked for it. Never expected it. But the night it aired on the local news, Laura saw it. My phone rang a few minutes later. I didn't answer. I just sat there on my porch, listening to the sound of traffic rolling over the bridge. The same bridge she once said I'd never be big enough to build. Most people remember 1986 for the headlines. The Challenger explosion, Reagan on TV, the sound of Springsteen on every radio. I remember it for the smell of graphite and machine oil. My world was smaller than the world on the news. We lived in a modest two-bedroom house on Riverside Lane, the kind of place where the front porch sagged just enough to squeak when you stepped on it. There was a little maple tree out front that I planted the year Ethan was born. By '86, it was finally tall enough to throw a bit of shade across the window where Laura kept her houseplants. Every weekday followed the same rhythm. I woke up at 5:15, poured coffee into a dented thermos, and left before the sun came up. By 6 a.m., I was at the Public Works Department, second floor, desk 3B, my drafting table pressed against a window that looked out over the river. You could always smell it: mud, diesel, and morning fog. That smell meant home to me. I was 32, a civil engineer with 10 years in and not a single complaint on record. I wasn't the kind of man who made speeches or chased promotions. I believed that steady work was its own reward, that keeping the water running and the bridges standing meant something, even if no one noticed. Laura used to say I hid behind blueprints because they didn't talk back. She wasn't wrong. Numbers made sense. People didn't. When we met in college, she was studying interior design. She laughed loud, dreamed bigger than anyone I knew. She told me she wanted to live in a city skyline, where the lights never go out, she'd say. I told her I wanted to build the lights that stayed on. Back then, it felt like the same dream. By '86, that dream had split in two. She stayed home with Ethan, painting when she could, but mostly she took care of bills and meals and the endless laundry that came with a 6-year-old. I'd come home every evening to the smell of pasta or chili simmering on the stove, and for a while that was enough. But I could see something shifting behind her eyes, a restlessness that I didn't know how to quiet. Money was tight. The city hadn't approved raises in 3 years. We drove a rust-colored Ford that stalled whenever it rained too hard. Sometimes I'd find Laura sitting at the kitchen table after Ethan went to bed, staring at the classifieds for jobs in other states. "Mike," she said once, "if we sold the house, we could start over somewhere bigger. Maybe Chicago. You could work for a private firm. I could design again." I remember rubbing my thumb along a coffee stain on the table. "And leave my projects halfway done? The town needs that bridge fixed before next spring." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "You're loyal to that bridge like it's family." What I didn't tell her was that it felt like family. The people who drove across it every day trusted that someone, some quiet guy with dirty hands, was making sure it didn't fall. I liked being that someone. Ethan didn't see any of the tension. To him, I was the dad who built Lego cities on the weekends and made his toy cars little cardboard ramps. He'd sit beside me on Sundays while I drew, asking, "Dad, what's that line for?" "Load-bearing beam," I'd tell him. He'd nod like he understood. Those were good moments, simple. Still. But when the house grew quiet again, after Ethan's laughter faded upstairs, I could feel the distance between Laura and me widening. She'd sit by the window, sketchbook open, but the pencil never moved. I'd ask what she was drawing, and she'd say, "Just thinking." Sometimes she'd look at me like she was searching for the man she married and couldn't quite find him anymore. And maybe she was right. Maybe I'd buried that man under too many layers of routine. Still, every morning, I tied my boots, packed my lunch, kissed her on the cheek, and promised myself that hard work would fix everything, that one day she'd see the meaning in it. The city I worked for wasn't glamorous. Our office had flickering lights and coffee that tasted like pennies, but the projects mattered. Roads, water systems, bridges that connected people's lives. When you spend your days drawing those connections, you start to think maybe you're building something bigger than yourself. That was the belief I carried home each night. That was what I thought love looked like, showing up. But love, at least the way Laura saw it, needed movement, risk, ambition, and I was too grounded for that. One evening, I caught her standing in the doorway of the living room, holding one of her old design portfolios. Dust clung to the corners. She flipped through the pages like she was flipping through another life. Do you ever wish we'd taken more chances? She asked. I smiled without thinking. We've got a house, a kid, and a roof that doesn't leak. I'd call that a good bet. She smiled back, but her eyes said something else. That was the smile of someone slipping away, one quiet disappointment at a time. If I'd looked closer that night, maybe I would have seen the storm coming. Maybe I would have heard the words she was getting ready to say. But I didn't, because in 1986, I still believed that doing the right thing was enough to keep a marriage standing. Just like a bridge, strong on the surface, silent underneath, until the cracks begin to show. Some cracks don't show until it's too late to fix them. You think everything's holding just fine, and then one night, under the smallest pressure, the whole thing gives way. For us, it happened in the middle of an ordinary week, nothing special. No argument brewing, no storm on the horizon. Just another tired Wednesday. I came home late again. It was nearly 9, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock above the sink. Ethan's school shoes were by the door, small and scuffed, one lace missing. The smell of reheated spaghetti hung in the air. Laura was at the table, her hair tied up, a half-finished glass of wine beside her. A magazine lay open in front of her, one of those glossy city lifestyle ones full of apartments with white couches and floor-to-ceiling windows. She didn't look up when I walked in. "Sorry I'm late," I said, setting my lunchbox down. The new stormwater plans had to be redrawn again. They changed the specs. She nodded, but didn't answer. I sat down across from her, the chair scraping against the floor. "You okay?" That's when she looked at me, really looked. Not angry, not sad, just tired. Like someone watching a movie they've already seen too many times. "Do you ever wonder," she said slowly, "if this is it?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "This," she said, waving her hand around the kitchen. "You, me, work, bills, another bridge, another project. Is this all there is?" I didn't know how to answer. I thought about Ethan upstairs, asleep in his race car bed, about the blueprints on my desk back at the office, about the people who drove across that old bridge every morning. "It's not flashy," I said finally, "but it matters. I'm proud of what I do." She let out a small laugh, sharp, humorless. "Proud? Mike, we're drowning. You work yourself to the bone for people who don't even know your name. You're talented, but you play it safe. You could have been something bigger." Her words stung, but I tried to stay calm. "Bigger isn't always better, Laura. I just want to give you and Ethan a good life." She stared at me for a long time, and then she said it. The sentence that would echo in my mind for decades. I should have married someone who dreamed bigger. The room went quiet. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. I remember my hands, how they tightened into fists on the table. How I wanted to say 100 things at once. That I did dream, just not in the way she meant. That every bridge I built was a promise. One that kept strangers safe, that gave the city something to stand on. That I worked late because I believed in something steady and real. But all I said was, "I'm sorry you feel that way." She blinked, surprised. Maybe she expected me to fight. Maybe she wanted the argument, the spark, anything that might make her feel alive again. But I didn't have it in me. The silence that followed was heavy. She turned her eyes back to the magazine, flipping the page even though she wasn't reading it. I sat there for another minute, then quietly pushed my chair back. "I'll check on Ethan," I said. Upstairs, his nightlight glowed against the wall, casting little stars on the ceiling. He was curled up with his stuffed bear, peaceful, untouched by any of it. I stood there watching him, my chest tight. "Dream big, kid," I whispered. "Just dream different than me." When I came back downstairs, Laura had gone to bed. The half-empty glass of wine sat on the table, a faint lipstick ring on the rim. I cleaned up the dishes, wiped the counter and turned off the lights. But I couldn't sleep. All night I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles. Her words played on repeat, softer each time but cutting deeper. I should have married someone who dreamed bigger. By morning, I'd made a quiet decision. Not out of anger, not revenge. Something simpler. If she thought I lacked ambition, I'd prove, not to her, but to myself, that purpose doesn't need applause, that you don't need to shout to build something that lasts. So I went to work. I showed up early, stayed late, took every project that no one else wanted. I learned, studied, pushed, built, and while she drifted further away, I poured everything I had into concrete, steel, and lines on a page. Each design became a silent promise that what I built would outlive me, that even if she stopped believing in me, the world never would. That was the start of it, the quiet war I fought for 30 years, and I never told her a word. The morning after Laura said those words, something inside me settled. Not with peace, but with a kind of final clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades fast when you've spent your life swallowing disappointment. What stayed was something deeper, quieter. A vow. Not the kind you say out loud, the kind that lives in the bones. That morning, I left for work earlier than usual. The sun was just coming up, throwing a dull orange light over the river. The streets were slick from rain, reflecting the sky like broken glass. I remember thinking, if I can't make her proud, I'll at least make something that lasts. At the Public Works office, I walked straight to my desk, flipped open the latest bridge file, and started sketching. My supervisor, Tom Wilson, stopped by around 8. "Mike, you're in early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "You and every other married man," he chuckled, then paused. "Hey, listen. Riverside Bridge failed inspection again. We're short-staffed. City Council wants a redesign, but no one wants to touch it." I looked up. "I'll take it." He blinked. "You sure? It's a mess. Foundation's cracking, budget's thin, and every councilman's got a different opinion." "I'll make it work," I said. He hesitated, then handed me the folder. "All right, Grady, it's yours." That was it. No applause, no big music swell, just a quiet exchange that changed the next 3 decades of my life. The Riverside Bridge wasn't glamorous. It was old, corroded, and barely holding. But to me, it was personal. It connected 2 neighborhoods, blue-collar families like mine, who depended on it every day. I started staying late, studying load capacities, weathering patterns, stress points. I filled notebooks with sketches, equations, and ideas no one asked for. When the city lights turned off and everyone went home, I stayed. The janitor, an older guy named Carl, used to find me there at midnight, hunched over blueprints. "You don't get paid overtime, you know," he'd say, sweeping around my desk. "Yeah," I'd answer, without looking up. "That's not why I'm here." At home, the distance between Laura and me grew wider. She stopped waiting up. Some nights she'd leave dinner in the fridge with a note that said, "Reheat if hungry." I'd read it under the flickering kitchen light, eat quietly, then go to bed beside a woman who had already drifted miles away in her mind. Ethan noticed, of course. Kids always do. One evening, when he was about 16, he came into my workshop where I kept my drafting tools. He stood there for a minute, watching me draw. "Mom says you're obsessed with that bridge," he said. "It's not obsession," I told him. "It's responsibility." "But it's just a bridge." "No," I said, setting down my pencil. "It's the kind of thing that carries people. They never think about it, but if it fails, everything stops. It matters." He nodded slowly, pretending to understand, though he couldn't have yet. Years passed. Laura's art studio dreams faded, and by the time Ethan went off to college, we were 2 strangers sharing a house built from habit. Then one day, she left. No drama, no shouting, just a note on the counter that said, "I need to find myself again." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't chase her. There was nothing left to chase. Instead, I went to work. Every ounce of love I'd once given her went into that bridge. I poured it into steel and concrete, into numbers and angles, into nights of rain-soaked inspection, trips by flashlight. Somewhere along the line, I stopped working for approval. I started working for the people who'd never know my name but would drive across something I built and never once worry if it would hold. The bridge became my confession, my apology, my purpose. And when the redesign was finally approved, I signed the plans quietly in blue ink, dated it, and handed it in. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "You just gave this city another 50 years, Grady." I smiled. "That's the idea." He laughed. "You ever gonna take a vacation? Maybe when the bridge doesn't need me anymore?" That project changed everything. It wasn't just steel and bolts, it was the start of my second life. From that point on, I wasn't just the quiet guy who clocked in and out. I was the man who fixed what others walked away from. And even though no one said it out loud, people started to notice. I became the one they called when something couldn't fail. But at home, the silence stayed. Years later, when I crossed the completed Riverside Bridge for the first time, the morning sun caught the new beams and I thought, this is what she meant by dreaming bigger. She wanted grandeur. I found purpose. That was my turning point, the day I realized that sometimes the biggest dream you can have is to build something that holds when everything else falls apart. 30 years can slip past like a long workday, one task bleeding into the next, one season rolling into another. You don't notice time passing until you look up and realize your hands have aged, your house is quieter, and the world has changed around you. By 2016, my hair was gray, my back ached every morning, and most of the young engineers at the city office called me Mr. Grady. I was fine with that. I never needed to be anyone's boss. I just wanted to leave something behind that worked, something that lasted. That's when the city announced plans for a new bridge, a big one, the kind that would connect the downtown district to the growing neighborhoods on the east side. It would cross the same river I'd looked at from my drafting window for decades. I remember the first meeting. The young project manager, full of energy, said, "This bridge will define the city for the next 50 years. We need the best design team possible." Then Tom Wilson, my old supervisor, now gray and half retired, spoke up from the back. "Then you want Grady. Nobody knows this river better." They all turned to look at me. I didn't say much, just nodded. That was how it started. For 2 years, that bridge became my world. I studied soil samples, wind load data, stress tolerances. Every detail had to be perfect. I worked late nights again, just like I had in the old days. Sometimes I'd drive to the river at dawn, sit in my truck, and watch the water flow under the rising sun. The river had a way of humbling you. It reminded you that everything man-made eventually faces gravity, time, and weather. The trick is to build something that can endure all three. I wanted this bridge to endure. When construction began, I was on site almost every day. I knew the crew by name: welders, crane operators, steel workers. They treated me with a kind of quiet respect, not because I was their boss, but because they could tell how much it meant to me. One afternoon, a young worker asked, "Mr. Grady, you ever get tired of building the same thing?" I smiled. "Every bridge is different," I said, "but they all do the same thing. They bring people together. That never gets old." It took 2.5 years to complete. On the final inspection day, I stood in the middle of that massive span, 6 lanes wide, gleaming under a pale blue sky. The river rushed below, steady and endless. I thought about Laura, about that night in 1986, about the sentence that never stopped echoing inside me. I should have married someone who dreamed bigger. And I realized something. I had dreamed bigger, just not in the way she'd meant. Not with grand speeches or business empires or fame. I dreamed of strength, of reliability, of something that would still stand when everything else fell away. The city council decided to name it the Michael Grady Bridge after it passed the final inspection. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know they were considering it. When Tom called me with the news, I laughed. "You've got to be kidding," I said. "No kidding, Mike, you earned it." I stood there on the phone, speechless. For a man who had built his life around silence, that moment left me completely without words. The dedication ceremony was broadcast on the evening news a few weeks later. I didn't go, crowds never suited me. But the cameras went and so did the speeches. I watched it from home, sitting in my old recliner with a cup of coffee. The reporter stood in front of the bridge, the bronze plaque gleaming behind her. The Michael Grady Bridge, 2018. She spoke into the camera. "Today, the city honors a man whose life's work has kept this community connected for generations. Michael Grady, a humble engineer whose bridges have carried us safely for decades." Hearing that, something inside me loosened. Somewhere across town, Laura was watching the same broadcast. I didn't need to be told, I could feel it. I imagined her sitting alone in her apartment, remote in hand, staring at my name on that plaque. Maybe she remembered the man I used to be, the man she thought didn't dream big enough. Maybe, for the first time, she saw what I had really built. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. It was Ethan. "Dad," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Mom saw the news. She told me to tell you she's proud of you." I didn't know what to say. So I said what I always said when words failed me. "Tell her thanks." Then I sat there quietly, listening to the sound of traffic rolling over the bridge. People going home, families crossing safely. Every hum of a tire over the concrete sounded like a heartbeat. That was my applause. I didn't need a stage or a crowd, just the quiet sound of a city moving forward on something I'd built. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd finally crossed my own bridge. They say time heals all things. I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal, it settles. It turns sharp pain into something dull, something you can carry without bleeding anymore. By the time the Michael Grady Bridge was finished, I was 62 years old. I had more gray than brown in my hair, and my hands had the texture of the steel I spent my life shaping. The city held a dedication ceremony down by the river. A big event with speeches and cameras and city officials in clean suits. I didn't plan to go. I told them, "Put my name on it if you want, but I don't need to be there," they insisted. "It's your life's work, Mike. You deserve the moment." Deserve? That word still feels too heavy for me. So I went, but I stood off to the side, near the water. The wind carried the sound of applause, the rustle of papers, the mayor's voice echoing through the speakers. "Today, we honor a man who built not for fame, but for faith," he said. "Faith in community, faith in endurance, faith that quiet work can hold up a city." The crowd clapped. I watched from the shadows, hands in my pockets. When they unveiled the bronze plaque with my name on it, the Michael Grady Bridge, something inside me shifted. Not pride, not regret. Just a calm recognition. Every sacrifice, every late night, every word I never said had turned into something real, something that would outlast me. After the ceremony, I walked halfway across the bridge. The steel gleamed under the afternoon sun. Below, the river rolled on, same as it always had. I ran my fingers along the cold railing, feeling the hum of traffic under my feet. That's when I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Laura, not at the years, not even at myself. I had spent so long trying to prove something that I forgot why I started. But in that moment I understood I hadn't built the bridge for her. I built it because of her. Her words had hurt, yes, but they also carved out space inside me for something stronger to grow. That night, the local news aired a segment about the dedication. I was sitting on my porch with a mug of coffee when it came on. The reporter stood in front of the bridge, wind tugging at her hair, talking about legacy and community. Then she said my name. Somewhere across town, Laura was watching the same broadcast. Ethan called later that evening. I could hear his son, my grandson, laughing in the background. "Dad, Mom saw the news," he said. "Oh?" I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, she called me after, said she was proud of you." I didn't know what to say to that. I just stared out at the river and listened to the faint hum of cars crossing the bridge. "She said," Ethan continued, "you finally dreamed big." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I just kept working," I said softly. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "I'm proud of you too, Dad." That one hit deeper than I expected. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, watching the lights of the bridge flicker in the water. I thought about all the years I spent chasing meaning through motion, the long nights at the drafting table, the empty dinners, the quiet mornings. And I realized something. The bridge wasn't just made of steel and bolts. It was made of forgiveness. Forgiveness for her, for myself, for every version of me that thought he wasn't enough. A week later, Ethan brought his son to visit. We took a walk across the bridge together. His little boy ran ahead, his laughter bouncing against the metal beams. Ethan stopped halfway and looked up at the plaque. He traced my name with his fingertips. "You built this," he said. "We all did," I replied. "Every person who crossed it, every worker who lifted the beams, I just drew the lines." He smiled. "You always make things sound simpler than they are." I looked out over the river, the afternoon sun shimmering like liquid glass. "That's the thing about bridges," I said. "They look simple, but every inch carries weight. The trick is making it strong enough that no one ever has to think about it." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then he asked quietly, "Do you ever miss her?" I took a deep breath, feeling the wind against my face. "Sometimes," I said, "but I think she was right in her own way. I needed to dream bigger. I just didn't know my dream would be made of steel." We stood there for a while, not saying much. The traffic hummed, steady and endless. When we turned to head back, I looked one last time at the bridge stretching across the water. It felt alive, carrying strangers, connecting lives, standing firm. "She wanted a man who dreamed bigger," I whispered. "I became a man who built something that would outlast us both." And with that I walked away, light for the first time in years. You know, I used to think success was something loud. Bright lights, applause, headlines, but the truth is the strongest things in life are built quietly. They don't shout, they just stand. So if someone ever tells you that your dreams are too small, remember this. It's not the size of the dream that matters. It's how much of yourself you pour into it. Maybe your dream is raising a good family. Maybe it's running a small shop, teaching, fixing cars, building bridges, or holding someone's hand through hard times. Whatever it is, if you give it your heart, that's big enough. If this story meant something to you, if you saw a little bit of yourself in it, I'd love for you to share it. Hit that like button so more people can find it. Leave a comment down below. Tell me what your bridge is, the thing you're quietly building that matters most. And if you'd like to hear more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, because sometimes the quietest lives leave the loudest echoes.